recordings on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, thanks for the invitation to be here today. I'm really, really pleased to be here with all of you. And my name is Karen Wolfgang. I am in Portland, Oregon. I currently work for a small family foundation based in Seattle, Washington, doing climate solutions funding. But the majority of my time right now on climate issues is going into the development of a climate hub. So a one-stop shop for the Portland metro area, which is just going to serve us, but I'm connected to other people doing hubs in other locations. So that's the idea there, is exactly to provide people with concrete ways of taking action so that the problems of climate change don't feel as unsolvable and overwhelming. So I have two kids, they're 11 and 12. And you know, I do other things too, but for the relevance to this conversation, I think that's who I am and where I'm coming from. And yeah, like I said, I'm happy to be here with each of you.
So hi, my name is Rebecca, and I am very interested in general in environmental issues. I actually majored in ecology and evolutionary biology in college, and I got my master's degree in evolutionary biology as well. However, I am right now focused on Israel-Palestine peace building. I would like this conflict to end so that we can focus on the more important issue, which is climate destruction. But in the meantime, we have got this on our plate. I maintain an online forum on Quora.com called Unity is Strength, which has more than 1 million views a year. And we've expanded to a number of other platforms, including this one. And we are also the first forum on Quora to have received external grant funding. I'm very glad to be able to discuss the comparison and contrast between these two issues, that both of them require large-scale cooperation. And there are individuals that their individual interests may not align with the global long-term interests. So in that respect, there are similarities in the challenges, but there are also a number of differences. And I am very glad that Karen is here as well. Thank you for coming on. So, Karen, can you talk about Climate Hub and what got you to create Climate Hub? What was sort of the catalyzing event? What were some things that helped you get there? What made you take that particular strategy? And what even is Climate Hub?
What even is it?
Yeah.
So the PDX Climate Hub has several sort of origin threads, and one of them was conversations that we were having through the CO2 Foundation, my employer, about how to sort of comprehensively present information that was actionable, specifically with regard to climate education. So bringing resources about the problem and solutions to people in the classroom. But there are already really good resources like the Queen Network for putting together resources for educators on climate change. And so that didn't turn out to be the most useful way to approach it. We sort of dropped that conversation on the CO2 Foundation side, and at the same time, I had been reaching out to some folks in the Portland area that I was getting to know, and they knew people, and it turned out there was a critical mass of folks that were all interested in this idea of bringing resources together in a local way, and bridging that gap between sort of overwhelm and action. And so we started, it's been about 9 months since we started meeting, and where we've gotten to this point is we have the back end system established. We're using something called shareoregon.com. They've essentially donated that to the effort. It's a friend of mine through the foundation. And we are almost ready to start uploading content onto it, except we've gotten, I don't want to say sidetracked. It's not a sidetrack. It's actually really important work that we're up against right now. We're starting conversations with some of the BIPOC or climate justice organizations in the Portland area to ground truth of concept, because it's become obvious that the sort of what I would think of, or what the people that I'm working with, most of whom are older individuals who are white and coming from kind of a particular cultural perspective of activism throughout a lot of years, and the environment being the most important thing, because obviously we do need to solve this problem. Everybody is affected by it. It affects everybody in a different way, but nobody's immune. Like we're all going to be impacted by extreme weather, by economic disruptions, by potentially migrations that are already underway. So it's not like any of us are going to get out of this without having impact. But the ways that different people, because of histories, because of where we live and how we're engaged in the world, like those impacts are different, and the opportunities for action are different. And so the way that we would think is like just the easy way to reach out to 350.org and Citizens Climate Lobby and Citizens or Climate Reality, some of the big nonprofits that are dealing with climate change, and have them put their opportunities for action on this site. It's not quite that simple. Like there are organizations in Portland that have been doing climate justice work since before there was a thing called climate justice. Environmental justice came first, in terms of like a different, more people focused perspective on these environmental issues. So like, how is this impacting people's lives? How is it impacting different people in different ways? How can we stand up for each other powerfully to come together across these differences in order to address the bigger challenges of environmental destruction? So I think that's one of the most interesting things about having the opportunity to have this conversation right now, is that is exactly what Rebecca just said, that there are people, there's like a human side to this coming together that has to happen to take individual and collective action. It can't just be, there's a big problem, governments need to solve it, or there's just one right way. Like, no, we need to be connecting across difference to recognize what our opportunities are, and be more empowered to take effective action together. So that's where we're at right now.
So what state exactly is Climate Hub in right now?
So we have the back end that's been cloned. We could start uploading content tomorrow, but the next step for us is to have these conversations with the BIPOC organizations. And if that phrase isn't familiar, I don't know how widely that has traveled internationally, but it's like everywhere right now in my awareness. But what that means is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So BIPOC. And that essentially is foregrounding the experiences of non-white individuals and communities. And so we're talking to organizations that are working on behalf of and like in service to our BIPOC communities in Portland, about how this tool might make sense for them, or like where our blind spots are. Because we don't have exclusively, it's not like all older white people, but that's the dominant perspective in our organizing group. So we're trying to figure out, okay, like what have we missed? And how is that going to influence the way that we move forward? Is it all a go? Everything that we've sort of thought is going to be a good fit for putting on the site? It's like everybody goes, thumbs up, that's great, make it happen. Or is it like, whoa, you know, you're missing some big pieces here and we need to tell you what they are. Or, you know, you need to go figure it out. We're too busy to figure it out for you. So we're over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be having those conversations, and we expect that either, you know, we're going to put up the content because it's going to be great, or we're going to figure out another route, like some way that we need to move forward with those perspectives integrated, that hasn't been clear previously.
Okay, so how would you say the forum would, so how did you find the groups who are involved in the Climate Hub? How did you get them on board?
So the folks who are organizing with me, we have a core team of 8 people. Well, our you know, executive team, our bridge team is 4 people, and 2 of them kind of come together as a package deal. They work with something called the Pachamama Alliance, and they've been working together in that respect for a long time. So they came together to the effort, and they have been central to moving it forward. And then another of those 4 people literally met her at a party, because who doesn't go up to people at it was a party hosted by another person that is active in climate change activism in Portland. So it wasn't totally random, but who doesn't go up to people at parties and say, hey, so I have this idea, what do you think about this? And then, you know, it just so happened that that person was really into it and had been thinking about something similar. So so they joined the team as well. But it's been a series of outreach emails and phone calls, just kind of opportunistically to people that I know. And then, you know, well, okay, who do you know that ought to be here? I have a spreadsheet, because obviously who doesn't think in spreadsheets too? I have a spreadsheet of about 400 organizations in Oregon that have something to do with climate, either have signed on to, you know, either that's their primary goal, like I said, you know, 350, CCL, these Climate Reality, these organizations where that's what they do, or they're like a BIPOC serving organization that has some kind of a climate program, climate justice program, or they've signed on to one of the many coalitions that we've had moving environmental legislation ahead over the last 5-ish years. Or they are an organization, a business, for example, that signed the We Are Still In pledge. So there's lots of these opportunities that organizations have had to show up for, for climate action. And I just kind of tracked them down and stuck them in a spreadsheet, and that's who we're reaching out to. So opportunistic connections to build our organizing team, and some intentional, like, hey, we need to diversify here. So there's been some of that, but not enough. So there's more of that coming. And then research.
Very cool. So one question as well is, what is climate justice? And so, can you answer?
Yeah, that means that's like it means a lot of things. But climate justice essentially is recognizing that different individuals and communities are impacted differently by climate changes underway and will continue to be so, and approaching the work that we do to take climate action with that in mind. Sometimes you hear the phrase frontline communities. So that would be people that are affected first and worst by climate change, where the impacts are like the most severe and they happen, ahead of some of the impacts that are felt by people that are more privileged, more insulated, have more resources to respond, et cetera. So climate justice is taking action with awareness of historical patterns in a way that doesn't perpetuate them.
Yeah, because there are some very interesting parallels between Climate Hub and Unity of Strength. Climate Hub, like Unity of Strength, is an open online forum where within guidelines, anyone can post. Not every post gets accepted, but people whose posts have met a certain standard that have submitted to the forum will get invited as contributors. And when they meet another standard, they would get invited as moderators. So like Climate Hub, it's an open place where people can discuss the issues and also what can be done and what is being done about them. So there is that. And so being a repository for other people is one parallel that there is between Unity of Strength and Climate Hub. One of our differences is that we've started online. We also, unlike Climate Hub, which is its own thing, its own hub, we are pursuing a strategy of piggybacking off of existing online platforms. So originally we started on Quora. I'll tell you why we started on Quora. We started on Quora, first of all, because I was familiar with Quora. I'd been writing for it for a while by the time I started it. And Quora had a new feature called Spaces. Spaces are collaborative blogs. And so they're kind of like Reddit subreddits. You could share a link, you could share an article, you could share an original post, you could ask a question and then get other people to answer it. That, by the way, the question answering is the original feature of Quora. And so Spaces were created near the end of 2018. So in early 2019, there was still no space about Israel and Palestine. So I created it. There was one about Israel, there was one about Palestine. Both of those were new. So we were feeling, so it seemed like the right platform. Also, there was a group of people who were near the center. They were moderates. And the moderates seemed on Quora to have a competitive advantage in creating spaces because it was a small enough community that if you were too radical, you lose one side. Whereas if you were moderate, you could still attract both sides. So with early mover advantage, we could get that up and running on an Israel-Palestine space, and then the space has grown from there. So we sort of started like Climate Hub organically from the grassroots. And we do focus more intrinsically on education about the issues. Climate Hub, as I understand it, is just about organizations and their initiatives. We have some of that, but also just regular people who are writing their own views about Israel and Palestine. And most of them will tend to be from the region, or they'll have some sort of a tie to the region meaning Middle East and North Africa. if not Israel-Palestine directly. Most of them will have that, but some of them are from elsewhere, and some of them are on the ground in Israel or Palestine. So the goal is to make sure that within guidelines, of course, there are multiple perspectives presented. The goal is also not to give people a gotcha, not to trip people up. That's very important for a process like the peace process, because a lot of the peace process has been making demands that look like they're reasonable, with the idea being that the other person won't agree to them, and then it looks bad. But our forum, the goal is not to do that, conspicuously very much not to do that. And we let people present more moderate ideas. And yes, so we've got some very good questions in the chat. So we're going to segue into those. So the forum, it's gotten a lot of people interested in the peace building process by showing what it is. A lot of people had either or visions, but visions of accommodating both groups in different ways. And we don't officially specify a particular solution, but visions of accommodating both groups is something we try to focus on. We also do have one-sided posts, like posts that are either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, but the idea is that they're not going to collectively make the other side responsible. You can support one group without really going after the other one. It's possible to do that. And you can criticize one group even while supporting the other, as long as it's not holding the individuals collectively responsible, and a few other parameters like that. So we've attracted a lot of attention, and we face challenges of our own as well. So before we go into that, what would you describe as the most significant barriers to recruiting people to support the movement of climate justice, and how do you overcome those barriers?
Ooh, I wish I knew. So what we're trying to do with the hub, and this kind of addresses the other two questions as well, does it work on the ground, and what we'd like to do it to do on a regular basis once it's up and running. So I can share, and anybody who's interested, I can share this with Rebecca, and it can go around. I have one publicly facing document that sort of describes the aims of the hub and some of the things that we've done and what we expect to do next. So happy to share that. It'll be a little more logical than my brain, just yeah. But so it answers these questions for sure. But what we think it's going to do is that organizations that offer people concrete opportunities to do climate action on the ground will sign up as vetted organizations. So they'll just go through a pretty short process, but at least that will get them posting privileges. So we won't, for now, have options for individual people who don't represent organizations to post on the hub, because there are so many organizations already that that do have different aims and different approaches, that we want to provide that that space where different approaches are welcome, but a lot of individuals also have really creative ideas, and eventually we could potentially accommodate those, but we don't want to muddy the waters. We want the action opportunities to really represent the good work of organizations that are focused on climate action, not individuals who are just kind of thinking through stuff. Even one of the team members on our team who I love is, you know, doing a little class coming up, and he's not doing it with the backing of any organization. He just, as an individual, inspired by some of the classes that he's taken, was like, I'm going to offer this class. You know, that isn't actually something that would be able to fit on the Climate Hub at this time, because it's delicate. Because I mean, I think one of the big barriers is that people don't know who to trust. There's been a lot of mistrust manufactured in the climate change space. It has been very intentionally created. So when people see in the media that there's a debate about whether climate change is real, which is not true, you know, that is a manufactured narrative. And then they, you know, look around and they see people around them being really confused and overwhelmed by, you know, still feeling like, wait, is this real or not? And then seeing, you know, extreme weather seem to take a huge uptick with the super fires in the Pacific Northwest. And I mean, around the world, there's examples. Hurricane Ida just hit on the 16-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf here, and then kept going and flooded out the, you know, the Northeast. New York and New Jersey got huge impacts from that. Like, that's not good stuff, you know. And it is, it's climate exacerbated, right? So there's a lot of dissonance where people just aren't sure who to trust. And so one of the huge impacts that I'm hoping for in Portland is that anybody who's doing legitimate work on climate action, and it's not going to be me deciding who is legitimate. There's going to be a sort of a group of people that follow our policies on how do we onboard those organizations? What are the things that we're asking, and how do we make sure that actually those are legitimate organizations? And I'm not just, you know, we're not just.
You're vetting them.
We're vetting them, yeah. So there will be a vetting process. So it's not just going to be me deciding you're legit and you're not. But we want to cast the net wide, but make sure that any of those action opportunities that are on the hub are ones that will make a difference in people's lives and, you know, with the overall problem. So even a small impact does make a big difference. And so we want people to do things in their lives and their households, you know, that contribute positively to climate solutions. But what we're kind of aiming for is more of a collective impact. Like, by taking a small action, it's a springboard to taking bigger action. So doing something as a group, or moving an effort forward that's like a policy effort, for example. So not getting stuck in the like changing the light bulbs and starting a compost bin, although that's all great. We need people to do those things, and also to connect to other people and raise the bar for what effective climate action really looks like. Gosh, I still feel like I did not answer that question, but maybe, I mean, Rebecca, what do you see as some of the like the barriers to getting people involved in the Israel-Palestine peace building process? Like, are they similar, or
Okay, so
there are
a lot of similarities. So one of the similarities as well is the perception that Israel-Palestine is an intractable conflict. Some people think that their little thing is not going to solve the conflict. So one difference between the climate and Israel-Palestine is that the climate, there's pretty much consensus that we need to do something about the climate. The end result, there is a consensus on. And so the issue is inertia. And the issue is the potential mismatch between self-interest and group interest. And obviously the big players in the climate change have the biggest impact. But on Israel-Palestine peace building, it's a little bit different because not everybody agrees about what the end goal is. So everybody has their own favorite solution, whether it's Palestine from the river to sea, or Greater Israel, or two states. And even when you're talking about two states, there's a lot of questions about what the borders would look like, what the arrangement would look like, how open are the borders, will there be another government over these two states in some type of a confederation, or there's another solution called federation, where that actually Emmanuel, who's one of the people attending this talk, is one of the leading supporters of, where federation is regional governments under a larger central government. So instead of two states, it's many regional governments. In Emmanuel's plan, there are 30 of them. And so that is another potential end goal. But different groups have their different favorite end goals. And so one of the differences between Israel-Palestine and climate destruction is that there is a conflict as well of its own for this reason between the moderates and the extremists. That some people, even if they would rather see their own group having the entire land, they know it's not possible. And so they will prefer to support some type of a compromise. And so whereas with climate destruction, there is a conflict with climate denialists. Unfortunately, there are people who are in denial that there is a climate situation at all. But that's a different can of worms. Maybe the analogy to climate denialists in Israel-Palestine, the closest analogy is people who are denialists that one group has deep-rooted, long-standing cultural ties to the land. This exists on both sides. And so that's one.
There's another issue is denial that the problem needs to be resolved quickly. There are quite a few people who just, especially on the Israeli side, who just don't think, you know, we can live with the status quo forever and ever. And I guess in the climate area, there are also not insubstantial number of people who think that things can continue. So that's I think in a way it's common. It's important to convince everybody that there is a real problem. Okay, so with climate that may be easier because when the rain comes in, you know, and it's too bad, then people begin to realize. But I wanted to ask you: in Oregon, have there been any bad weather events which drive the message more home, or has Oregon been exempted from that?
Oh, that's a good question. Oregon, we used to think that this is where all the climate refugees were going to come, and still we're looking pretty good. But we this summer had a unprecedented heat dome, which caused 116-degree temperatures. So over 4 days, you know, our previous high temperature ever recorded in Portland was 106 degrees. We broke it, you know, by a degree, and then by another degree, and then by 8 degrees.
Okay.
It was actually a degree, and then 4 degrees, and then 8. Like we've never seen anything like that in this part of the world. So, and it was even a little bit worse up north into Canada, where briefly a small town in British Columbia was British Columbia or Alberta, one of the two Western provinces, was the hottest place in the world. It was like 120 degrees. So then, you know, last year we had really bad fires over Labor Day weekend, which is what we're in right now. So we're still all kind of holding our breath around, are we going to get through this Labor Day without something similar? And there's fires burning north of us and south of us. Like we haven't had the smoke impacts this summer that we had 2 summers ago, but it's still been really bad. So yes, people are definitely starting to make the connection. And the media, there's been a lot of effort put in, and it's still this much of what we need, right? But there has been a lot of effort put into telling the story of how the expected climate impacts that we were, theorizing about 30 years ago are happening now, and they're actually even worse than what was expected based on the initial sort of science of how greenhouse gases operate in the atmosphere. So that the extreme weather piece is a huge opportunity to tell the story of how, not only how the climate change that's already underway is impacting all of us, but also how climate justice factors in to, again, the different impacts on different people with different sets of resources. And that the heat wave is like a pretty perfect example of that, because people who are able to leave, go to the river, go to the coast, just vacate, right, if something big like that is happening, or they turn on their air conditioners, which is not a typical amenity in the Pacific Northwest. We haven't been used to having air conditioners. We haven't needed it. But people turn on their central air AC, or go buy a little unit, and that manages the environment for them. But there's a lot of houseless people in Portland, and then there's a lot of older adults that are living, independently, but can't afford to get air conditioning, or can't get themselves to a cooling center, or don't maybe even know that those are options. The cooling centers that we set up this summer saved a lot of lives, but not everybody got there. So we had officially the biggest mass casualty event in our county's history during that heat dome. So yeah, it really highlights how the experience of those kind of events differs so widely between people with different sets of resources. And I don't know if that's the thing that motivates people to get involved in climate justice. I don't think so, because a lot of people just sigh the sigh of relief, and they're like, wow, good thing that wasn't me, good thing I got through that okay. Like, I'm sorry for them, but like, really, what can I do? Yeah, there's not an easy answer for that, but I hope we're working toward it with the Climate Hub where we're at right now.
Do you want the hub to be only a passive hub which takes in questions and response, or do you see the hub as something that will reach out, for example, to schools and other places to actively teach or educate?
That's a great question. So there won't be a ton of discussion. So that's one way that Unity of Strength and the Climate Hub are not quite the same, right? There's not going to be a forum for conversation around these issues directly within the hub. It's going to be organization posts an opportunity, and individuals come on, and like the best metaphor that I've found, which I don't like, but is shopping. Like, you shop for an opportunity. You can filter the opportunities for like when they're happening, where they're happening, what kinds of skills are involved, that kind of, that kind of experience. And then you show up with a little menu of options, and it's like, okay, well, am I gonna go plant a tree with this organization, or am I going to join a discussion group with this organization, or am I going to go to a protest? There's going to be hopefully options available for people that like different types of things and want to take action in different types of ways. Now, so many of the opportunities we'd be connecting people with are already out there in the community, like they're already out sort of making connections directly, that I don't necessarily think there's going to be a role for our hub in like pushing out. The primary role is going to be as a collector and as a connector for organizations that are already pushing out into the community. There's always a sort of a marketing side to any, like an outreach side, right, to any effort. And so we will have to probably, make ourselves known in some way, and that might be more direct, like we might table that stuff if that's of interest to the organizations that are participating, or to individuals that want to take action. So there's, with coronavirus still as it is here, I think most of our outreach is going to be digital, but still there may be opportunities. There used to be in our city resource fairs, so like anybody in the city could come and like look at 30 different organizations that could tell you how to like repair your bike or winterize your water system, or like do energy efficiency work on your house, or just like all of those sort of cool opportunities to do things more sustainably. So that'd be a great place for the Climate Hub to show up, but I don't think that we're going to directly have capacity to do a lot beyond that.
Because also this is one of the differences between Climate Hub and our platform by its nature. Now, Quora discussion is what Quora is, especially about such politically contentious issues. So for example, Unity of Strength, even compared to other Quora forums, has a tremendous number of comments. That's the nature of the topic. And in fact, we get about 1 comment for every 100 visits to the forum. We have those stats, and that's very unusual for a Quora space to have that high a ratio of comments to views. And it's because people often they don't agree with things that are being said and posted there because people care. So on the good side, people care. They care about one or both of these groups. The idea would be for them to care about both of them, or at least to come for one and stay for the other one. But they certainly care. So it's kind of an automatic attraction of a lot of attention to write about Israel-Palestine. Now, we do have a new web domain. Now what it has is where all our online presence is, and a list and a summary of the kinds of things we do. That's what's on our web domain now. But theoretically, it could grow to have more of a menu of activism. So having started out as a discussion forum, we've grown to having events like this. We've grown to having talks like this. We're now, yes, we are expanding on the ground. We've got our first unofficial on the ground meetups with the pandemic having subsided. And so we are no longer limited to Quora. We've long had text chat for our participants. Well, we're not so old, but what do we mean by long? It means that the text chat is by now more than a year old. The first one is more than a year old. And the forum is a little more than 2 years old. So it's definitely got a lot of different formats. So in addition to being a place where established groups like the Federation movement can post the information about themselves and find supporters, it's also a place for people to build up efforts that might not be as well established before the creation of the forum. And so, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's what?
I haven't ever used Discord. I use Slack, but I know you guys have a Discord space, and I think that is something that we may layer on top of the Climate Hub as more of an active space for, you know, throwing ideas back and forth and having some of that discussion, because the Climate Hub, you know, it will generate conversation, right? So how does that work for you, the Discord space, and would you recommend it as a platform for asynchronous communication? I know it's one of the tools, and you have a lot of tools for asynchronous conversation about the topic, but
yeah,
would you recommend that one?
So yes, I would probably recommend Discord. We use both Discord and WhatsApp. Part of this is by popular demand. And so Discord, different Discord chats about Israel-Palestine topics, they can really have a very different flavor. But one of the things that we have is we're able to moderate our Discord largely by sharing the link in very specific places. We share it on Quora, and in general, the most active people are there. We also share our Discord with a few other Quora spaces that are about various topics in the Middle East and North Africa region. So originally, we were the Unity of Strength Discord, but now we're the Middle East and North Africa Discord. Middle East and North Africa is the umbrella space for all the other Middle East and North Africa spaces. By now Unity of Strength has really caught up to it on views and on a lot of other measures of activity. But if you want to write about Iran, if you want to write about Saudi Arabia, if you want to write about Morocco, we share our Discord with spaces that are covering those topics, even if it's not directly about Israel-Palestine. Lately, for obvious reasons, we've got a lot of discussions of Afghanistan because the Taliban have just taken over again. Yeah, so that's another thing that sharing a forum with another group or starting it in another groups and sort of branching off a little more gradually is one way to grow your base. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you create an online community.
I agree with you that it's very important to have some kind of discussion group, active discussion group. You have to have a feel of the pulse of what's going on in your community. Okay, and it's important for feedback for you, and also to just know what's going on. You know, when you all of a sudden you see everybody talking about something that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah.
So especially with regard to disadvantaged communities, the BIPOC or something like that, you probably find yourself all of a sudden surprised by certain things that no.
Yeah, I know, like, yeah, and also what people react to and what they don't react to. There is a little bit of a random process because some things just catch on, and it can mean that different online communities can have totally different vibes. And so, for example, if you start two different Climate Hub discussion groups from two different parent groups in two different places on the internet, you could end up with something totally different.
So I think that the end game, well, so there's two things that are occurring to me, and like to some extent I'm thinking about this as a bigger picture of like where are the parallels between climate action and action on peace building between Israel and Palestine. And to some extent I'm thinking of it as like a technical problem. It's a technical, like we're having a technical discussion about your tools versus our tools or whatever, where can we learn from each other there. But the capacity that we have to moderate or to be posting and reviewing posts, like I know I need to be mindful of that, because at least at this point we have a pretty limited capacity. And so if we're, I have to be really strategic about like where are we trying to have conversations about the Climate Hub, and whose conversations are we trying to join into, and that's a whole set of things that I haven't really thought about. Not just who are we connecting with organizationally, but like where are they or the communities that they're working with having ongoing conversations on this topic, and how can we participate in a way that ultimately drives people to take effective climate action, to get more involved, to not spiral down into the like there's so many places that one can get stuck in the climate change conversation, but how do we use our tool and be strategic about where else we're showing up and trying to participate, so that ultimately we're really bringing people in and pursuing that goal of getting them into action, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very important thing to do. Yeah. So wrapping this up, what do you see the future of Climate Hub and next steps, and how they might lead to the future, and the potential of Climate Hub's impact on climate change?
I just yesterday was introduced to a concept called 10 by 10, where there's a gentleman who has worked on social transformation, and is one of the problems that he's looking towards solving is, of course, the greenhouse gas accumulation problem, and the way that he's like looking out and he's seeing that, internationally, a lot of governments are making commitments, but none of them are sufficient. And on a household or personal level, people are doing a lot of things, putting on solar panels, doing those like one thing at a time kind of things, but they're not going to scale. And so his aim is to activate teams of people, each team committed to finding a solution to draw down 10 megatons of carbon. I think that was the number that he was shooting for. And the team aspect, like activating groups of people with that single goal in mind, really appeals to me, because it gets us out of, I don't know, I like I said, I only found this guy yesterday, and I was like, whoa, I think that's really, that's a really great way of looking at it. Like, we set a goal that is related to the bigger goal, but is ultimately achievable by a small group of people working together and committed to that one piece, and so next steps, I think I've already sort of said for the Climate Hub are connecting with BIPOC organizations and seeing what is going to serve them and their communities. And that also related to Roger's comment before he popped off, does, you know, the BIPOC organizations are already doing a pretty good job of serving youth and women. Like, those are all kind of part of the package deal of climate justice. So making those connections with the organizations and seeing how that drives us going forward. And then we're going to put the content up, and then we're going to launch. Like, those are the expected next steps. And I did put the public facing document that I mentioned in the chat as well for anybody who wants to check that out. So if those next steps push us in the direction of people taking more effective action in their lives, and potentially eventually teaming up to tackle those kind of medium scale goals. None of us individually or even in small collectives can tackle the big picture goal of climate, you know, climate resolution, climate stability, but we can do more than just change our light bulbs. So those, like, if the Climate Hub can help us get to those, like, take responsibility as a collective for those ambitious but achievable medium scale goals, well, then that's where we're going to start making really big progress.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope.
Well, that's a really great idea. Yeah, because the truth is, not everybody actually can change the game. It will take a lot more than one person, but having a critical mass of people engaged in a cooperative effort that isn't too difficult for them could really make a difference. Even if we can just slow climate destruction and we can't stop it, each amount we slow it gives us more time to prepare. Each amount we slow it can save a bunch of people, can save a bunch of species, can save a lot of things. So climate destruction, it is not an all or nothing thing. How we deal with it in the near to medium term future can really affect the long term quite a lot. So that's a really great idea. So on the Israel-Palestine side, I'm just reading about crowdsourcing of smaller scale efforts. Now, I was thinking this from the beginning, that Israel-Palestine as well, it's not all or nothing. A relationship is a relationship. It comes in many gradations. So even if you have, for example, what we might think of as a great relationship, the relationship between, say, Canada and Denmark. They're kind of neighbors because Greenland is connected to Denmark, and it's probably fine, but I'm sure there are issues. Nothing is perfect. At the same time, with Israel and Palestine, there are a lot of people who want to paint it as black and white, but it's really not black and white. There are definitely people who are friends across the line. There are people who are very much on the same page across the line about what they want to see. And there are areas where Israelis and Palestinians cooperate. So, for example, it's not in all-out war. We have managed to accomplish that. The West Bank is basically nonviolent. And in Gaza, the current state is that there is a ceasefire. Now, this may not hold, but let's hope. Let's hope that there can be a mutually agreeable solution.
By the way, climate can make an impact on the situation, because we had fires, forest fires, and one of the arguments there is that they must have been started by people, and then of course it's immediately Palestinians who started them, even if there's no evidence, but that causes a ruckus, and that can turn into violence.
Yeah.
So we have an interaction there.
Yes. It's also a very hot climate that is very vulnerable to drought. And so if it gets hotter and drier, then it gets less inhabitable. If there is an energy shortage, then it may make desalination more difficult. And so, so it as well, it's affected by climate change, and it's not either or. In turn, solutions to Israel-Palestine can potentially be a template for international cooperation on the climate. So they do have a mutual impact. So Sergio, what?
Just adding a point of view from outside, I always learned that the main reason for the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis was the real source. It's not religion or anything else, it's water sources, the fight for water sources. With the climate changes affecting that in a more serious way, if we do nothing, the tendency for conflicts to get even worse is a serious threat. That's how I see it. I might be ignorant on that, but that's exactly, going to the bottom line, that's what I see.
Okay, so at the moment, Israel and Palestine do have enough water. Now, the distribution of the water is still an issue, but right now they are able to get enough water. They have to kind of economize on the water. Now, this may change with the region growing in the population. That's the trajectory. But at the moment, water is not the limiting factor. The issue is really cultural paradigms.
By the way, the ecology is a driver for a one-state solution, because the area is basically, it's one geographical area, it's one ecological unit, it's one climate unit, and it should be treated as one unit. So that's something that people try to avoid talking about, but it's a big issue. The water the Palestinian use, after it's being used, goes into Israel, because they're sitting up higher up and it flows down. So there has to be cooperation on a very close level to deal with all these things.
Yes. Yes, and let's just hope that the environmental challenges will bring everyone together rather than pulling them apart. So on that note, I wanted to say thank you, and I'm going to end the recording, but this does not mean that the discussion is over. The discussion will keep going. I'm not closing the video. And thank you all for coming. And thank you for this great discussion.